Have you ever wondered how your favorite brands seem to know exactly what you want? While data driven marketing can feel magical, it's built on trust, and protecting that trust has never been more critical. Welcome back to Club Conversations, Season 2, Episode 14. I'm your host, Caleb Roche, and today we're going to talk about the importance of data privacy in marketing. Buckle in, it's going to be a good episode. So, first off, as we always like to, let's talk through why this topic matters, right? The first part of this topic is we are looking at increasing customer awareness around data privacy. Secondly, we're looking at rising regulations like GDPR, CCPA, and more, which are ultimately reshaping the marketing landscape. And third, there's a balance between personalization and respecting privacy that as an agency, as a marketer, we believe that there's some important ethical considerations when it comes to data privacy within marketing. Now, what we're going to talk about today is we're going to explore why data privacy matters in marketing. And then secondarily, we're going to discuss key regulations, strategies to build customer trust, and real world examples that actually apply to these situations because it's extremely important. A lot of marketers, whether you're in a smaller business, maybe mid-sized level business, you're most likely not worrying too much about data privacy, especially when it comes to your marketing. And when we're looking at these regulations that are coming out the path, they're going to continue rolling more and more out. It's important that we get a grasp of a baseline understanding of data privacy in marketing so we're prepared and ready for any shifts that we see in the marketing side. Now, first off, you might ask, why does data privacy matter in marketing, right? Because when we think about marketing broad level, there's really nothing crazy or, it's not like we're collecting clients' social security numbers, their bank account information. So when it comes to marketing, is there really data that we need to protect? And you might think no, but truthfully speaking, there's a lot of data that you want to protect from a consumer level and from a brand perspective. Now, we're starting to see a lot more consumers expecting transparency on how their data is used, right? So more customers, more consumers are getting aware of the data that we're collecting, the data that we're using, and they're expecting brands to lead with transparency. And so, from my opinion, the first step of this is trust is obviously the key factor in building long-term customer relationships, especially in this climate, because the more trust that we can build with the customer, obviously the more trust they have that we're ethically using their data for good purposes and not bad purposes. Now, from a consumer's perspective, we're seeing that, from any study that I saw a study that 81% of consumers say that trusting a brand is a key bearing factor, which might not seem like a ton, but if you look at 81%, that's a pretty good majority of people. And secondly, we've actually seen that, obviously, and this is on the data side, data breaches have led to reputational damage, loss of revenue, and it just becoming more and more important. Now, one of my favorite examples here, there's a great documentary about it, really fascinating about consumer behavior and how a big firm, essentially shape the minds of consumers. When we look at Facebook's Cambridge Analytica scandal, it had a major impact on both trust and business practices, not only within Facebook, but then really any brand that's doing any sort of advertising or marketing, because it became it rose to the top of the water that there are some ethical and business considerations when it comes to data privacy and marketing. And it's not just about collecting data and using it. It's about how are we protecting customers to the best of our ability with ethical considerations in place. Now, when we look at the key data privacy regulations, there's basically two that seem to be the most popular as of right now. And I'm sure there will be more at the time of this, along with, future 2025 to 2026. But we find the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation, which applies to businesses targeting EU nations or EU citizens. And then we also have the CCPA, which is the California Consumer Privacy Act, which obviously gives California residents more control over their data. So we're starting to see more regulations emerging in global markets. So I know there's a lot more coming up in the US and Canada and a couple other locations. So seems like this is going to be a big hot topic, but there's a couple implications across these regulations that we've found, right? So there's a lot of, it's becoming more and more popular. Consent requires for data collection. So what used to be able to get by just, pressing an I agree or accept all cookies or pressing I consent, it's becoming more of a larger scale operation to actually get consent when it comes to data collection. Secondly, there's the clear privacy policies and opt-out mechanisms. There's the new unsubscribed, where you now have to offer an unsubscribe button within one time, especially across membership. So there's a lot of privacy policies that are being required by businesses. And third, there's a lot of deprecation happening across third-party cookies. And now, the rise of first-party data is actually happening. And so we're seeing, when we look at, let's say, Apple, obviously iOS 14 rolled out and the app tracking transparency was really impacted from an advertising revenue standpoint, because we're not able to track as much data as we used to. And so it used to be very easy to track revenue, track ROI, and bring better advertising to consumers. Now, because of iOS 14, we're actually seeing large decreases in ROI and ROAS, because across all industries too, because of their tracking transparency, which is a great thing. But we need to take into consideration that what was working, we need to adapt and adjust to, what fits different models. Now, when we look at ethical data use, there's a couple best practices that I'd like to touch on here that I think are going to be important. Three main ones that I'd like to touch on, and I'm sure there's a couple more. But first, I believe transparency is key. So we need to make sure that we're upfront about what data you collect and why, and provide easy to read privacy policies. As consumers, I think it gets a little overwhelming when we think about the massive privacy policies that we're agreeing to, the terms and conditions, that we don't actually know what we're signing or agreeing to. And so from a consumer perspective, the more transparent we can be, the better it is for a consumer. Now, secondly, we're recommending this to a lot of our brands that we work with. We're seeing a major move across our clients and others that we're talking to. There's a big shift to first party data, right? So we need to really focus on the data that we're collecting directly from customers, not from third party sources, not browsing behavior, but we're looking at directly from the customers through opt-in surveys, interactions. What can we find out about this customer that we can collect real time from that customer instead of relying on third party data? Now, the third piece of best practices for ethical data use is we're going to recommend minimizing data collection. So a lot of brands, they collect a lot of data about people, about their customers. It's great, but we need to make sure that we're effective on collecting only the data that you truly need to improve personalization without being invasive. What happens is we can sometimes alienate our customers or consumers by asking too many questions or collecting too many data points. And sometimes the simple answer is the easiest answer. And so from an example here, we saw a direct consumer skincare brand. We actually found them to build trust by offering both an optional personalized quiz. And then what this did was it explained why each question is being asked, just for more perspective for the consumer, so there's a little bit less of a trust gap between what data is being collected and what they're using that data for. Now, we found a couple different platforms that we like using within our data privacy compliance side of things. There's a couple tools, technology. First, there's two great privacy management softwares that we've seen. So OneTrust and TrustArc have been really phenomenal for managing compliance. We've had some really great experiences. Second, secure data storage has become a big thing. So implementing, encryption sources, secure cloud storage solutions, those are all massive things that are very important. And then thirdly, there's these consent management platforms now that we're using. So cookie banners and preference centers for compliance and customer choice. All of these are contributing to a much more privacy compliant world, especially when it comes to our customers' data. And the better we can get at protecting our customers' data, the more trust we can build and the better relationship that we can build long term. Now, we saw from an example level, we saw a small e-commerce business. What they did was they implemented a cookie banner. And what's phenomenal about it is by implementing that cookie banner, they actually saw no drop in site engagement. And not only did they see no drop in site engagement, they actually ensured GDPR compliance, which was kind of a win-win situation, which is absolutely phenomenal. Now, when we look ahead of the future of data privacy, we see two things that really stand out here, right? So we see consumer trends, and then we also see the regulatory trends. So from a consumer trend perspective, we're seeing obviously an increasing demand for transparency and data ownership. And second, we're seeing some potential shifts as AI and machine learning evolve. And I think that's a little TBD to understand exactly how that shapes data, what's being collected, what's not. Now, on the regulatory trends, we're seeing two things. One, we're seeing emerging global standards. A lot more countries are adopting data privacy laws. They're focusing more heavily on it. And secondly, they're increasing penalties for non-compliance. So we've seen some companies get fined or have some penalties for not being compliant, which is a big deal. Now, we saw a rise in zero-party data collection strategies, and why we're sharing that is we actually saw a lot of customers are willing to share preferences when asked, right? Sometimes we think we shouldn't bother the customer, we shouldn't ask them questions, but we've actually seen over the course of the past several years that the more first party data that we collect and the more transparent we are, the more data we actually receive on that customer, which is a really fascinating concept. Now, as we wrap up this episode, giving you 3 key takeaways. First, data privacy is both a responsibility and an opportunity to build trust. Second, staying ahead of regulations is crucial for long-term success. And 3, transparency, ethical practices, and leveraging first-party data are the future. Now, I highly recommend that you start reviewing your data privacy practices today because you need to be proactive, not reactive. You need to look at compliance with major regulations and ensure your customers know that their data is in safe hands. So thanks for tuning into this important episode of Club Conversations. Stay ahead of the curve and join us next time as we explore more strategies to elevate your marketing efforts.